at Magellan's, there's still a number of stories in here that I'll read at readings, and I'm going to start off by reading my two favorites. And I should say this about my stories: they're all very tiny, sometimes just a paragraph in length, and in fact, a lot of them I had submitted as poetry and published them as poetry. So I don't see a huge distinction between prose poems and flash fiction. And this first one that I'll read is called Rio de Janeiro, and I submitted it to a contest. I'm going to forget who ran it now. Esquire. They used to have a flash fiction contest every year. And this one was for their 78th anniversary, so it's exactly 78 words long. It did not win the contest, but I like the story still. And the only thing that you need to know about it is that it references that giant Jesus statue in Rio de Janeiro, and it's called Rio de Janeiro. He flew to Rio without her, believing this trip, like certain cliffs, would give him perspective. He saw the famous statue of God and the slums beneath it climbing. The tiniest birds were beggars, the sun cruel. Everywhere the women ignored his tourist Portuguese. Everywhere the poor were hungry and had steady eyes. The eyes of God were steady too, but on the horizon, where now and then the bottom of a boat was eaten by the world.
Very good.
And well, thank you. I'm really attracted to the idea of a limitation on a story. I don't know why that is attractive, but I like arbitrary limits where, you have to do it in 150 words or 2 minutes or whatever. And NPR used to have a 3-minute fiction contest, which I always used to submit to, and I never won that one either. But this is a story that I was prompted to write by that contest, and I still like it. And the premise of the contest was that it had to be a ghost story, which is something that I don't ordinarily do. I shy away from ghost stories, I think, in general. But that was the one criterion, and the other one was that it had to end with the line, "Nothing was ever the same again after that." Which I'm really interested in that last line, because in a way, almost any story could end with that line. So there's part of me that thinks I should delete it from the story, but I left it in, and it's called Orchard Bright. Some people swore that the house was haunted. Some people said it was just the wind. It rose out of the hill like a hunk of pale sky, the original blue still visible where a shutter had fallen off. A rabble of apple trees surrounded the house. I lived in the Orchard Bright development just below it. There was an apple tree in every yard. I suppose the developers wanted people to believe that they had spared a tree for each of us from the original farm. The houses were clean and new. My own still smelled faintly of fresh paint. But the development had street names like Mountain View Road and Paradise Lake Lane. There were no mountains, and the lake was bottomed by concrete. Scarlett lived up in the haunted house. I liked her because she smiled at me even when I didn't deserve it. She let me kiss her as her mother patrolled the lower floors with a dust rag and vacuum. We sat upstairs on the bedroom rug, listening to the radio, adjusting the little knobs. Scarlett told me that once, late at night, footsteps had marched back and forth in the attic above her bed. She said it was a ghost of something beautiful. That's where some people said the guy hung himself. Some people said the guy was Scarlett's father. One night, I snuck into Scarlett's room. A half moon was caught in the telephone wires. I told Scarlett I loved her. She told it back to me, but she said it with tears, like love was a burden, like I was something she couldn't get her arms around, a washing machine, a grand piano. Some people said Scarlett slept around, that all you had to do was knock. Maybe that was true, but I didn't care. I figured she was searching for the guy who could rescue her, who could steal her away from that azure house, the house where her crazy father had died and where her mother kept prowling in search of dust. Scarlett asked me how I could love her. I didn't understand. That was like asking how apples knew it was time to leave the tree. They just did when they were ripe, when the sky was closing in. But Scarlett wasn't prone to accepting the irrefutable. She told me that we were wrong for each other. She told me to stay the night. I was crying now too. Nothing made sense. She was asking me to stay and telling me to leave. And yes, by stay, I mean to make love. And by make love, I mean for the first time. And by the first time, I mean to turn each other to shivers in a rickety house while her mother stayed up smoking with Johnny Carson and the thud of raccoons or her father's feet kept stumbling above us as he tested the beams for strength. And we fell off of the bed and broke a table. And the TV cut off below us and the pacing stopped, and her mother came screaming up the stairs. I climbed half naked through her bedroom window, deeply in love, and ran down to my house in Orchard Bright, where the apple trees once were full of bees. I stood on the back lawn, watching Scarlett's house for some kind of sign, thinking she would wave from her window at the dark. She didn't. And eventually the lights of that old blue house went out, one by one by one. Nothing was ever the same again after that. I'm going to follow up with some poems from the book Something an Atheist Might Bring Up at a Cocktail Party, which is a chapbook that Judy's press, Mayapple Press, published back in 2018. And it's a strange book for me because it's full of lined poems, which I haven't been writing for years now. In fact, the reason I'm so happy with this collection is that I had a bunch of lined poems that were kind of almost done that I never got around to finishing until 2018. But there just wasn't enough of them to collect into a larger book. And, you know, I've been on a prose poem kick for almost 10 years now. So I feel like this was a great place to capture all these poems that I still love, but that, you know, I just couldn't find a place for. So I'm going to read a few of those to you now. And this first one is called The City and the Country. Take off my glasses. The city won't stop. Even at 3 a.m., someone is desperate for a drink or a girl or the smoke of their own destruction deeply held. The moon does not pause for them. It wants to get away from their kicking, their rattling of the door inside its frame. The cab rolls by like a slow marble. Antennas blink on the tops of the tallest buildings. The pleading comes next. It is the sound of one dish after another being broken in the kitchen of a neighbor whose eyes you will avoid the next day in the building's mailroom. The country is no better. Opossums in the attic and roots crack into the basement walls. She won't open this door either.
I didn't realize that you weren't writing lined poems anymore, but I'm glad you wrote them for me.
Oh, well, thank you, Judy. Yeah, I don't know why that is, but prose poems, they seem to allow me to be freer than I had anticipated for reasons that don't seem logical, but yeah, I know you get it.
I had a major breakthrough with a poem that I'm actually going to read. I'm going to sing a section of that I published in 1978. And it was prose poems, and it felt like I could say anything.
Oh, awesome. I will look forward to that. Some of the poems that I collected in here, there's a lot of large projects that I had that never came to anything. And at one point I was thinking, oh, I'll rewrite the Bible. And I didn't get very far, but I do have a couple of those poems in this book that I'll share with you now. And the first one is called Pharaoh. By the third plague, I believed whatever he said. So when he came to me with the promise of flies, I knew that flies would crowd the air of Egypt, that I would have to breathe through gauze. I withstood their ticklish, unstoppable dance across my dinner and my wife, a buzzing that threatened to drive my generals mad. I should have given in or drowned him at the start in the red running Nile. Something decisive at any rate. I can't say why I kept refusing, only that it was glorious to see what his God could conjure. I confess I felt relieved to learn my limits and my loves, to realize at last I was merely a student of cruelty in the presence of perfect means. This one's called Jesus's Brother. It was difficult living with that relentless perfection. He wouldn't tell me how the water turned to wine, and he never did it for me either, only for strangers, only for a crowd. I remember him as someone who was always leaving to work his magic in the streets, among the men who clearly hated him, the women who somehow didn't. He was a lamp that lit my failings. He showed me the cracks in everything I thought and taught me to fill them with the music of his mystery, which he sang in a key beyond my range and which everyone around me kept trying to hum. I have a Google Earth poem like everybody else. I don't think there's anything you need to know about it, but except to maybe say that I think this is the longest title that I've ever published. It's called After Seeing on Google Earth that a woods containing the last hive of wild honeybees I'd ever seen has become a chicken processing plant. And this is about a bee's nest I found in Arkansas once. That honey was mine if I had the courage to come at dusk with an oven mitt and 2 sweatshirts, a ski mask and whiskey, to reach inside the tree for the heavy combs distilled from window box impatiens and the backyard tomato plants, to mash them down in a jelly jar, to twist it shut to my thumping blood, to run through the woods in terror. A draft of amber, a palm-sized star, an ooze of bee-flecked salve. But that hive has long since vanished in a crush of yellow-jawed machines. It is another sweetness gone, like the girls of my youth or my great Aunt Julia's chocolates, or like this constellation of violets slipping right now underneath this mower I ride. And I'm going to read this poem too, and then I'll just read one more. And this one is maybe the oldest poem in the collection. It's I had written it for my first book, The Man on the Tower. Miller Williams, who was the editor of the press, said you should have some kind of introductory poem. And I tested a version of this out on him, and both he and I said that poem stinks. Don't use it, and it did stink at the time. But I've been working on it for, well, up until 2018, and I like the result now, and it's called Introduction. There is something at my center, a thing I have protected all my life, the way a boy hides a bruise from whoever gave it. To find it, you must flake me away like an onion, first the brittle and papery skin, then all those layers, white as a tooth or a toppling wave, tightening down and down. If you do it right, your hands will not grow rancid, your eyes will not be stung. But all you have to dismantle me are the clumsy knives of your otherwise lovely fingers. We'll both be weeping as you near my core, and you must be prepared to taste it, to tell me finally what it is you've found. And I'll actually read 2 more. I'm sorry, I hate it when people do that, but I want to read this very tiny poem as well, which is an ABC poem, where each word in the poem begins as, the letter of the alphabet, so A, B, C, D, and so on. And it's called a 26-word explanation. A boy can dream exotic, fireflies, girls, hummingbirds in January, kayaks, lionized men, nooses of passion, corks. Repeatedly, something turns up vandalized. Walls, x-rays, yawning zeros.
Wow.
And I'll stop with this poem, which is the title poem of the collection, which, it talks about Galileo and the Catholic Church, but I think the poem itself explains the details. You'll probably remember Galileo was imprisoned for saying that we revolve around the sun instead of the other way around. And this is called Something an Atheist Might Bring Up at a Cocktail Party. Galileo went blind under house arrest because he'd seen how we revolve around something more beautiful than ourselves. It took the Catholic Church 359 years to see the sun set correctly into the Mediterranean. Its azure waves, the center of nothing, and even more lovely because of it. Thank you very much. Been very patient.
Well, I owe Charles the fact that I published with Fomite, because I saw that he had done a book with Fomite, and that made me look at the press. And this book that I'm going to read from, that we're launching this week, actually exists because Mark Estrin at Fomite said to me, you ought to do more of those, because I had done like 6 or 7 in my previous book that he also saw the manuscript. But I want to start just because my civic duty would require me to be at a meeting of the planning board tonight, and instead I'm here. So I sent them these 2 poems in an email, and they're both, I think, very pertinent to the work of planning boards, and they are from my book, Postcards from America, which was published by Woodstock's Post-Traumatic Press. So the first one is called Catatonia is the Nature of Trees, and the title is stolen from a poem by Leslie Gerber. What comes over the hill, suburb or forest fire, chainsaws, endless hunger. Wind singes the hillside, a stillborn meadow with stumps. Later, rain will rip through sentinel grounds, seeds stir in the dirt. Nothing lasts forever, not even emptiness. And this other one of that kind is much older. It's called Microeconomics. And when I wrote it, I didn't live in Woodstock. I lived up in Michigan in a small city, but I guess I was anticipating part of my life being on a planning board, microeconomics. Up on the hill, the farm is swallowed by the gravel pit. Orchards yield to houses. In the courthouse, selectmen hear the developers pitch. Every citizen has a stake. By the creek at the edge of the township, where the paper mill once stood, cottonwoods turn over their hands, silver and green, silver and green. I do love alphabetic acrostics, and I must tell you, Charles, you're the only person I know who's actually written one where every poem, not just the poems at the beginning of the lines, but every poem, every word is alphabetical. I've done 3 or 4 that are alphabetic acrostics, but it's just the first word of the line, and the rest of them can be whatever they are.
Yeah, it's hard. It's getting lucky, right? It's so easy to go off
yeah,
course.
What you did with it is more than lucky. That is amazing skill. I will read one of those just to, this is my next book, which is called GIMP. And if I can find the poem very quickly. This is called Trying to Sleep. All night, beeps of call bells, never quite dark in the halls, doors wide open. Everyone's asleep, I think, but me. I toss, flail, rearrange my sheets, grimace as the woman across the hall calls out, "Help me get up!" Again and again. I grope for earplugs, jam them in, know this will go on like last night until she manifests in her doorway, a wobbling apparition in her nightgown. The floor nurse takes her to bed again. Through open doors, I hear their voices. Then peace. She's quiet a while. I try to rest, hope to sleep, but no, soon she'll start again. 10 minutes, 15, did I sleep? Up the hall at the nursing station, voices, low for a while, then louder. When will someone bring her Xanax? My feet itch from yellow hospital socks. Where is Zen mind when I need it? I love that form. You know, it's funny because I always thought of myself as a free verse poet. You know, I have the soul of a bad labor poet, as Charlie once said. And I discovered that certain forms, and that's one, guzzles are another. And I guess, I don't know that I invented the definition, and this is the new book from Fomite Press. But what happened was that some friends of mine at a conference issued a challenge that the other poets at the conference in 24 hours should respond with a new poem. And they had a couple of different prompts. And one of them was, write a poem that is a definition or pretends to be of a word or something that you invent and say is a word. So the first one of these that I was aware of doing is the last one in this new book, and it's called Apocalypse. I should say the structure of the book is a palindrome, alphabetic. So it goes A to Z and then Z back down to A. Some letters have more than 2 words to them. I didn't much worry about that, but it does go from A to Z and back to A. And everything in it, including the author bio and the back copy, has the kinds of apparatus you'd have in a dictionary, like syllabization, part of speech, and pronunciation. And even the word blurb on the back, noun, verb, a short publicity notice as on a book jacket, such as, followed by my blurb. So we really had a lot of fun. And a lot of that was Mark Estrin's suggestion. And frankly, I don't think the book would exist except he liked the few that he saw of these in the previous book that I pitched to him. And he said, why don't you do a whole book of them? And he was very patient, waiting for me to do it. And occasionally I would send him a few and he would say, no, more personal. So this is a apocalypse. And I warn you in advance, it's 4 terrible puns. And if you were reading it, you would get it. But I have to alert you that these are all terrible puns on the word apocalypse. 1, the ruined temple of the goddess Calypso, once the center of her cult, located at the highest point of the city Calypsos, of which she was patroness, destroyed during a 50-year war with a neighboring city-state. The sun has blasted the bas-reliefs of her warrior kings. 2, a scrubby tree of semi-arid regions with gray-green foliage and a peculiar but pleasant pungency, often used in dry flower arrangements. The main food of Ursus tedius, a small flush-furred quadruped. They sit in pairs among the branches, endlessly grooming each other. 3, a type of speech impediment characterized by excessive sibilance, thought to have been the sound made by certain ancient prophetesses when under the influence of their deity. 4, a set of books containing names omitted or expunged from the New York telephone directory, held by certain groups to be the true record of the population. On sacred occasions, the names are read out in the city squares. Does anybody guess what the puns are? Acropolis, eucalyptus, lisp, and apocrypha. I mean, dreadful. And needless to say, I won the contest, which was a book of funny poems, appropriately enough. So this thing grew. There was one other poem that actually was kind of it was a definition poem, but I didn't know I was doing that. It's called Metaphor, and it is a noun from the Greek metaphora, which we have spelled in Greek letters here. 1, carriage, freightage, traction, traffic, a sign on the side of a moving van in Athens. Beds, bureaus, boxes of books. 2, the young tomcat tracks birds in the branches. His haunches prepare for launch. 3, I fold and float paper boats. That one owes a little bit to Dulce Maria Loinas, whose poetry I translated, and she had a poem about Noah's Ark and launching a poem into the world, but it does not come back, which somehow is in the background of that idea of the paper boats, which of course are metaphors. The new book that I'm working on, that I read that alphabetic acrostic from, also has a few poems from this book reused in it. I like to do that, you know, it's like where a poem belongs in a book depends on what the book is doing. And the new book is called GIMP, and it's about disability and aging and those kind of happy things. So one of the poems is called Handicap, and that is in the book. It's a noun or a verb. 1, from hand in cap, an English betting game, too complicated to explain here. 2, later, a competitive burden, such as weight added to a champion racehorse to give the less talented a fighting chance. 3, the number of strokes over par for the course considered appropriate for a duffer. At the tee, I consider mine very high and not likely to get any lower. I address the ball and swing. I whiff, hook, or slice. 4, in folk etymology, a crippled soldier on a street corner begging alms with his cap in hand. 5, I'm now rewarded with a special tag for reserved parking spots. The new logo looks like everyone is a Paralympics athlete. 6, some people don't like the term, or disable either. I just call myself GIMP. And there's actually a poem in here called Definition. And of course, the poem is a definition of the word poem, of the word definition, I mean. 1, clarity of outline, the light at dawn limning each edge of a building or tree. 2, clarity of meaning. 3, resolution of vision, the details through binoculars or microscope or after squeezing in eye drops. 4, dictionary entry, including etymology, pronunciation, usages. 5, my wish for certainty amid ambiguity. You know, I'm sort of messing around on computer dating again. And I read this to a guy who said he didn't know anything about poetry, but apparently it got him. This is called Shot. And I opened it at random, but apparently it got him. So 8 parts. 1, worn through into holes, old shirt, old shoes, too far gone for goodwill. 2, a hole in one, nice. 3, amber heat in the glass, a scent of oak. 4, and a beer. 5, walking in the dark, trees obscure the stars, a sound in the distance. 6, a 5-pound bag of steel pellets. 7, look straight at the camera and don't move. 8, this won't hurt a bit. How are we doing for time? We can just keep on going for a while, and you can do another round, Charlie.
Oh, definitely keep reading. I'll read a couple more poems, but keep going.
Okay. So this is called Lines, and it owes a little something to that Richard Wilbur poem about the angels dancing out in the alley. Lines. 1, bed sheets in the wind on a sunny day. 2, Poets worry about where to break them. 3, prompters give you yours when you forget. 4, Loretta Young's face was a porcelain mask. We admired her on TV. My mother fussed at me even then about the lines in my forehead. 5, the old lady next door had fuzzy cheeks and creases like the ones I have now crossing her lips. Her lipstick crept up into the lines. Did she get them from whistling? 6, the only way to avoid lines is never to use your face for anything. Something I truly believe, by the way. And right across the row from that one is not. 1, K-N-O-T, I'm talking about here. 1, up along the trunk, the tree has lost a branch. Years ago, maybe, the scar grown in around heartwood. 2, dark spot in the oak floor, beauty mark. 3, traffic intersection, the kind called a can of worms or malfunction junction. 4, marriage. 5, conundrum. Alexander untied it with his sword. 6, knitting. I pull yarn from the center of the ball. It comes out in a snarl to be picked apart with my fingernails. 7, my rough hair catches the comb. And I just realized that there are some inter thingies going back and forth in this book, because there's a poem called Conundrum, which is very different in flavor.
Judy, I want to interrupt and just say I love the beauty mark line definition of not. That I love that one.
Thank you. I mean, it was really great fun doing this, you know, kind of, I like puns, and this thing is just full of wordplay. Well, here's Conundrum. I mentioned Conundrum back in Not. So here's the poem called Conundrum, which actually was written before, and I didn't think about the connection between the two poems. Very different tone, though. 1, how can it be that the self evaporates, rising like a wisp of steam off the body, diffused into air? One moment, a pudgy 2-year-old, I respond laughing to my young mother, lovely in her high cheekbones and auburn hair. The next, there is no one there. 2, someone is required to identify the body before burial, the golem without the sacred name. In the open coffin, red lipstick my mother might have worn, white hair sprayed stiff as she would never do, only the bones of her face familiar. 3, I recall tying saddle shoes, their white chalked with polish, but still smudged. The back seat of the old black Studebaker, falling downstairs, dreaming of falling downstairs. Too late now to ask what they remembered. Daddy working in the family store after school. Mom and her aunts, new immigrants, smiling at the camera, squinting into the autumn sun. Some of these are kind of political, which I suspect that Mark kind of appreciated. This one's called Politics. 1, yowling cats on either side of a glass door. 2, knives in a blacked out room. 3, a chicken yard. Red and black hens peck, squawk, and flutter, no hawk in sight. 4, a man, a bulldozer, and a tree, folk saying. 4, 50 years of a bad marriage. And there's another, well, there are several of these that kind of get at my sense of what politics is like. This one's called Air. It's the first poem in the book. 1, walk out and breathe deeply. Fresh scent of pine, leaf mold, rain coming. In August, first drops on road dust. 2, a lovely song, fresh and light, sometimes with variations. An aria. I fill my lungs, trying to feel my back ribs stretch for a full breath, an extended phrase. 3, put it out for broadcast. We need more of it, flushing the dark rooms where politicians plot. 4, in winter, it bites. And I want to read one more that also owes something to Mark, because when I was working on the previous book, which was my Jewish identity book, and he looked at that manuscript, he said, you know, the only problem is if you're writing about the dilemmas of being an American Jew in the 21st century, you haven't said anything about Israel. And particularly given today's news, I think it's really important that I read this one. And I thought about it, and there was only one poem that even mentioned Israel, and rather at a slant. So I wrote this one, which I like quite a lot. At first, I felt like I had to write a poem that Mark would like, you know, and his politics are even more anti-Zionist than mine. But then I realized I had to write the poem that I had to write. So that's what this one is, Israel. 1, the national name of the Hebrew people. See also Jew, Israelite. 2, dreaming, history. 3, Jacob after he dreamed. 4, an infected cut that pulls when I stretch, throbs at rest. 5, a settler state. 6, where we will be safe if all else fails. 7, what I wrestle with. 8, love and fear meeting on a desert road and making peace. 9, the land belongs to no one, capital No, capital One. We walk on it and draw lines. Mine, we say in that toddler voice. 10, blood ties and blood. Just what I don't need. I'm gonna answer it and hang it up. Here we go. Blood ties and blood. So there we are. You want to do a couple?
Sure. Yeah, I'll do 2 short ones because I know. Well, I'll do 2 short ones. Prose poems of that. Like I said, I've been piddling around with these things for years now, and I'm putting together another collection now, and I'll just read 2 of them. They're both tiny. The first one is called Marbles. At a certain point, manic depression became bipolar disorder. The world has always been in flux. Just look at the sky. There are fewer stars now than when I was a boy. I cannot say who took them. I cannot remember the pictures that they made. Consider Istanbul. It used to be Constantinople, and before that, Byzantium. Nothing endures. I had a jaw men wanted to punch. Now the ground I stand upon feels like it's made of marbles. In Wyoming, they've just begun hunting the grizzly bear again. It is finally safe enough to be killed. I can't get over it. My teeth were once a dazzling white. All 3 of my brothers were living. And then I'll stop with this one so that we don't end on a completely sour note. It's called Greetings. I counted the water towers. I counted the active smokestacks. These were the breadcrumbs I thought would lead me back. Now I know it's possible to drive so far we forget why we left, that the journey continues even after the car breaks down. I used to think I had no message, but the message is me, bloodshot and hungry, spilled coffee down the front of my shirt. People of the future, gather round. I have traveled through ink to greet you. Thank you. You guys have been very patient. And Judy, I loved hearing your poems.
Well, I want to finish by singing
Oh, that's right.
a
You were
little
going to
piece
sing.
of that book of prose poems that I published in 1978 when I was still in grad school. And this is one of a few of my poems that I've managed to set to music. And even though I made soundscape for it, electronic sound, I really like it just as an a cappella. The book that it's from is called Mothering. And I've always said if I were French, it would be my novel. But since it's all prose poems, and it does have kind of continuing characters. So since I'm an American, it's poetry. Just goes to show you. She sees him walking toward her across the seafloor, slow motion. The light is blue and shifting. It falls in curtains and rays. There are fish all around, swimming between them like stars, blue and striped and shiny. He walks like a robot. If he holds her, she will hear his engine running. She can feel nuts and bolts holding his elbows together. She says, deep sea diver, I love you, with your silence, with your dark blue movements, with the world floating away, with birth and death in one place. I've actually set one of the poems from the definitions book, but I haven't really learned it yet well enough to perform it. So thank you, everybody, for coming. I suppose we should take questions if there are any, since we certainly have a little time.
Judy, when is the official release of the book?
Last Monday.
Oh, that was last Monday?
Yeah.
Well, congratulations. It's, you know, Judy knows from the beginning, I saw this in manuscript, how much I've loved this book of hers, Definitions. And for me, it's the most beautiful thing, perfect thing she's written. So I was delighted to be able to read it in manuscript and see how it developed and the cover developed. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I need to say something about the cover. The cover is just a delightful thing.
Yeah.
I approached a woman named Palin Law who lives around here and is, among other things, natural plants, native plants gardener and a lawyer, but she also is a collage artist. And she didn't have anything that she thought worked, but she referred me to a woman named Katie McCann, who has a website called, what's it called? Well, shame on me, I should remember that. Beetleblossom.com. And she does a lot of these collages with women's heads. A lot of them are, you know, sort of color-based, and this one is too. This one is called Silver, but some of them are all like mahogany. It's all furniture, but this has all the variety that the poems have, and I've gotten more good comments about this cover than just about anything I've ever done.
Yeah, it's perfect.
Anybody else?
I'm just going to jump in here. My name is Mark. I'm a friend of Charles from many years ago. Actually, we met when we were in second grade. And I just want to thank you both. This was just a fabulous time. You've given me so much to think about, so much to feel, and it really was just wonderful. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Mark and Ed, thank you so much for coming to this reading.
Really?
These are both two friends that I've recently reconnected with after like 30 years. Like we just haven't, you know, been in touch at all. So thank you for coming to the reading. That's awesome.
One of the other people who's here is John Palin, who's the picture of his wife with her cello is on the screen there. And John was part of the workshopping group, and Penny also, who's also here, were part of the workshopping group that helped me put the final touches on this. And John made a comment that I just loved, that it was kind of like getting a Whitman sampler. You know, you unwrap it and you never know exactly what's going to be in there. And I never forgot that. It's such a wonderful metaphor.
Yes, lovely.
Well, are we done?
I guess.
Well, I've got quite a few questions, actually. But I thought I've already had my chance, you know, over the months of editing of the books. I smell, and it's more smell than anything else, in your texts, both of your texts. I smell a religious level. And why I say smell is that there are very few words that we have for smell, you know, to describe smells. And so it's a little bit vague, and you know, you can talk about the Israel poem, but that's not what these poems are about. Nevertheless, Charles is surrounded by Dominicans. He teaches or he does whatever he does at a Dominican college. And Judith has a book called Olive Broken. And I'd like to hear you talk some about either religion in your poetry, or how that has affected your poetry, or where it is hidden in your life, and what you have to smell in order to smell it, and or if it's irrelevant, that it is irrelevant. But
certainly not irrelevant for me, and I suspect it isn't for Charlie either.
Well, so can you both talk a little bit about that, because it's not obvious in the poems. It is obvious in the smell of the poems.
You want to start?
Sure, I'll take a crack at it. You know, I certainly don't consider myself an overtly religious poet, but you know, religion or spirituality is part of any human experience. So I guess it creeps into my poems that way. And you know, maybe most obviously, I mean, I grew up Catholic, so I grew up in going to the Catholic Church, which I no longer do. So I'm certainly not practicing, but it has had an effect on me. You know, you can't escape your you know, the years that you lived one way. So I'm confident that it bleeds into my poetry, but I certainly don't want it to seem like I'm propagandizing for religion. And I also don't want to seem like I'm trying to tear religion down either. You know, I think there's religion is the stuff that people do to understand things that are inexpressible and unknowable.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like going it alone, you get the same answers, if not better answers. I mean, that's just my own opinion. Obviously, I don't want to offend anybody, or so I know a lot of people that are deeply conventionally religious, and I understand that. I was like that once myself, but I am no longer.
Well, I never was, because my family raised me as a Jewish atheist. Jewish for sure, and atheist for sure. And for a while I was a deist, because I couldn't figure out, I mean, I was thinking about stuff like this when I was 10. I lived in a family where we would talk about Hegel in the car, and my father was not a college professor, you know, but he was an old leftist, so and an intellectual. But when I was about 12, I realized that you didn't have to have a beginning. That whatever was before, if God was the beginning, well, you didn't need that. There was no beginning. And that's kind of where I still am. But I call myself a heterodox Jew. And that's, of course, a joke. And the book that Mark mentioned, Olive Broken, what I thought was a book of my Jewish book, you know, and then Eleanor, who is here, kept saying to me, no, it's about lots of people have that. And so I concluded that it was a diaspora book. And in fact, Mark O'Brien, who's another poet that Martha Deed and I both know, once talked about going back to Ireland as, you know, returning from diaspora, or going home for a while from diaspora. And I realized that that was what I was really talking about. I am actually affiliated with a synagogue and have been for a while, and was bat mitzvah at 50. But I have been known to give a talk, what they call a Devar Torah, which is the talk during a service, the sermon in English, in Christian terms, like, what's a nice atheist like you doing in a place like this? But I think my temperament is wonder. I just don't find most of the religious explanations satisfying to that wonder. But my sense of my history, and frankly, a great deal of what is in the tradition, the kind of humaneness and the rootedness in the body, the insistence that if you're going to make anything sacred, you've got to do it while you're alive. I taught Hebrew Bible at the university, and I had these kids who were almost all Christian. I mean, they were all Christians, and some of them were Lutherans who had taught Sunday school, so they thought my course was going to be easy. Ha, ha, ha. And some of them were seekers, and they just didn't get it. And one day somebody said to me, well, do Jews believe in heaven and hell? And I said, some do, some don't. It's really not important. And they just could not understand that. They could not understand that. But that is one of the things that I value about Judaism as a tradition and Jewishness, and also that it's all about arguing. I was explaining to somebody the other day, Charlie, that I think the difference between Jewish argument and Catholic argument, and particularly Jesuit argument, is that Jesuits are trained to win, and Jews are trained to look for the truth. Even though many Jesuits are wonderful intellectuals, because they're also trained to be people who think. And even though a lot of Jews, particularly the Orthodox ones who do that kind of study, are absolutely sure of what they believe, the tradition is arguing. And I value that tremendously. And it goes all the way back to the beginning, even the fact that the Bible is an argument with itself. It was written by a bunch of different people, and they don't say the same thing, starting with Genesis 1.
Donna thinks that our extended discussions are arguments, and I think they're discussions. And that's the difference between
and it took me a long time to figure out it was a cultural difference.
Yeah. Well, you know, ironically, I mean, my father, the one who talked to Hegel, was convinced that everything that he believed was based on logic and rationality. But he also had to win every time. And it took me a very long time and a fair amount of pain to realize that needing to win was more important to him than being rational. And so he used incredibly crooked arguing techniques. And, you know, to learn that that was the way it was, and you weren't going to win, and you weren't going to convince him because he needed to win, because he was sure he was right, because his thinking was all based on logic. Yeah, right.
But I don't need to win. I don't need to win. And that's why I think it's just a discussion. And Donna thinks I need to win, and that's why she thinks it's an argument.
Uh-huh.
Well, anyway.
So yeah, I'm a spiritual atheist, Mark. That's what I've always said. And my affiliation is as a Reconstructionist. And the thing about Reconstructionism is the question you ask yourself is, what's this good for? And that's the fundamental, the basis of Reconstructionist Judaism, is to look at the tradition and say, what's this good for? And some things are. And some things, like the subordination of women, they got rid of that in 1924. Can't be reconstructed.
Mhm. Others?
Hi, Judy. Can I chime in really quick?
Sure.
I'm reading Gwen Midlow Hall's book. Do you know her?
No.
So she's a Louisiana historian. Hi, everybody. I'm a historian.
Oh, hi, Shannon. I didn't realize you were here.
I'm here. And so she was part of the communist, she's Jewish and part of the Communist Party. Her family too were anti-Zionist. And it's really fascinating. It just came out from I'm outside, Haymarket Books. So I'll send you the link to the book. I think you would appreciate it very much, but she's basically a labor, communist, civil rights activist. She was married to Harry Haywood for 30 years, the Black activist, and clearly she's white. And so she's been speaking a lot about, as we all struggle with what's going on right now. It's interesting that I'm reading it now. She's talking a lot about what her parents taught her about being Jewish, and it reminded me a lot of conversations you and I have had about how you feel about your heritage and Judaism, and it's very interesting. So I'll send you the link to the book. I think you would like it very much.
How about if you post it on the chat?
Oh yeah, here.
Other people might be interested.
Yeah, let me see if I can do. I'm a Luddite. Hold on, let me see if I can figure.
Well, at the bottom of the chat, it says type message here.
Yeah, I see that. Let me just see if I can find it on Amazon.
Ah.
Okay.
Donna, when you get the recording, one of the things you're going to get is a text with all of the chat in it.
Yes.
So you could share that with Charles and me.
Okay.
And anybody who wants to buy my book, in any case, you can buy it at judithkerman.com, which is my website. And I'm also going to list all of my upcoming readings. I haven't done that yet, but I'm going to do that.
And yes, I did put a link to that in the chat too.
I saw that. Thank you.
Okay, well, we've used our hour. I have to say that I had no idea what was coming. In fact, I had no idea that this was going to be a readings. I thought we were just going to discuss things.
Well, poets,
thank
you're
you.
asking poets to discuss.
Yeah, poets like argue, or I don't know. So, but anyway, this is fabulous. You're both great readers, and I enjoyed it. I hope everybody did. And it does set. We don't have a format for this third Thursdays, and we thought we would discover it along the way. And maybe they're all different, as the people are different, and the principles by which they're paired up or not paired up are different, and all of that. But anyway, this was a iconic double reading, and thank you. Thank you very much.
And it was a great launch, and thank you all for coming to my launch, our launch. Although it isn't Charles's new book, but I just thought since he's connected to this book and through Fomite, I would invite him, and through my publishing him. I mean, it's just kind of a nice set of coincidences.
Right. That's actually what I thought we were going to talk about, is the switching roles of publisher and author, and how do publishers work. Like, how do we work? How do you work? How do you choose your manuscripts? What kind of manuscripts come to you? What kind don't come to you?
And that might be another great topic for a different day.
Absolutely. I'd love to do that.
Yeah.
We need to find another author who's also a publisher. That would be good. Okay, guys. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much for having us. This is
All
great.
Thank you very much.
Very
Thank you all for
Thank you,
coming.
everybody.
Great.
Well,